Hey everybody, I wanted to do a quick video. I recently read an article talking about potential changes by OSFI relating to how investors' income would be used for qualifying for residential real estate investment properties. And as an investor and a realtor, I found this kind of concerning. Rather than writing a blog about what could be a highly contentious yet very important potential subject, I felt it was best for my clients and me to reach out to one of my most trusted advisors who happens to be my personal go-to person for all things mortgages. And so I'm going to record this video of our chat about the subject so that you can hear it directly from somebody that's in the industry. I'm here with Keaton Kirkwood of Kirkwood and Brennan Mortgage Group. Welcome, Keaton. So let's just dive into this thing. And thanks for coming on, even though you're not feeling ideally. I really appreciate that.
No
Who
worries.
is OSFI, first of all? Because a lot of people are not going to know who that is without going into all the details. But
OSFI is the boogeyman for the banks. They're basically the government entity that regulates the banks and holds them accountable, and helps. Basically, their job is to minimize or to control like the systemic risk in the lending environment. So, I'm sure there's a
okay.
slightly better definition online. Google it if you're worried, but they're the one who audits the banks.
Yeah. They're the ones that make the rules for the banks or lenders and whatnot. Um, so what are these supposed proposed rules? Because I know a few of my clients have freaked out already.
Well, and that's the thing. There's nuance there. I'm still trying to get some clarification on this, but there's things like the stress test as an example, which is something that like the banks have to do. But there's other things that OSFI does that are more like guidelines, and one of those guidelines is a loan to income requirement. And the reason I use the word guideline is I've spoken to multiple reps at different lenders, um, including like one of the top people at one of the big banks on the sales side, so someone who writes mortgages, multiple people at the administrative, like the education side. So we call them underwriters. They're the ones who look at files, and um, one of them is one of the most senior people in BC for one of the major lenders. Um, None of them have really heard anything about these loan to income requirements. So we've seen if you Google loan to income requirement OSFI, OSFI, you'll see that in 23 and 24, they proposed some changes that were going to kick in the first quarter of 2025. So on paper, there's been very little noise about this, but on paper, they're already here. And it's just a rule that there's a ratio. They want to have a certain relationship of the amount of debt you have compared to your income. Now, there's already things called debt servicing rules, which is the relationship of the payments to your income. But they're not happy with that. They also want a secondary requirement, which is not the payments, but rather the total amount of debt to your income. So these are just different rules or guidelines, and that's fine. I believe it's not set for every bank, but 15 to 20% of every bank's business, or let me rephrase this. Probably the better way to put it is that 80 to 85% of every lender's loans every quarter needs to be within this guideline. And then 15 to 20% of loans can be outside of it, and it resets every quarter. So once again, not really stressful because um, most people aren't pushing things a crazy amount, and um, it's not the end of the world. But I think where people are concerned is that a news outlet reported that OSFI is adding in, or they're changing in quarter one of 2026, that this loan to income requirement will not be allowed to use income from what we call non-subject rental properties. So let's imagine, Andrew, that you own two properties. You've got your primary residence and you've bought one rental. Now you're going to go buy a new rental. So we're going to call them property A is your primary residence,
Yeah.
property B is your rental, property C is the new rental you're buying. Essentially, they're arguing that, hey, property B, the first rental you bought, income was used to buy that property. And according to this news outlet, you're not going to be allowed to use the income from that property to qualify for the new rental with this loan to income requirement. And I've had a lot of calls about this. People are really freaking out and worrying, thinking there's like the end of real estate investing in Canada. Um, but I don't really think that's the case because, one, this article, only this news institute or outlet has shared this. They share some quotes from an individual. If you Google those quotes, there's nothing. The only thing you can find is some blogs and stuff that are quoting this news article. So, I'm an investor, you're an investor, Andrew. I think a part of our role as investors, let alone professionals in this space, is critical thinking. Someone calls you, they've got a great deal, it sounds too good to be true. Be skeptical. some news article publishes or news outlet publishes an article. It sounds like the end of the world. They're the only one doing it. They've got quotes that you can't find anywhere else. They are at an event that if you go to the OSFI webpage, you look at the minutes and the notes of that event. There's absolutely no mention of the claim that's being made by this news outlet. All this stuff stacking up. Professionals, say myself, have called multiple lenders, be like, have you heard anything about this? Nope. All of this is stacking up that I think that this is a little bit maybe of a red herring. I think it's possible, but I don't think it's likely. Um, and the other thing to consider is context. So there's two quotes if you dig up this article, and anyone who's probably watching this is concerned about this already and looking up for more information. Um, so they've got these two quotes that have no context. It just says rental income, won't be allowed to be double counted or whatever for future things. But we don't have the context of how this loan to income requirement is even being looked at. In the event that loan to income is looking only at the property being financed, sure, this change makes sense. If you're buying a rental property and they're going to look at the income that rental property generates and your personal income, let's say, it makes sense that they're not going to add the income from the rental you already bought if they're not looking at that debt as well. Because fair enough, that rental property, rental property B, the first one you bought, uh, that property's income is dealing with its own debt. So fair enough. If we're removing the debt, it makes sense to remove the income as well. So that's kind of how I'm looking at this overall. Um, I'm not super fussed yet. If more details come out, then sure, maybe, but I've seen nothing. I just scoured the OSFI website again. I'm continuing to call professionals in the industry. It's crickets. No other finance or mortgage related news outlet has come out with more details on this. So, you know, I'm not
Okay.
too.
That's I really appreciate that because yeah, I've had a few clients very alarmed, shall we say,
Was
how am I
being
going to continue
presented.
to build my portfolio? And so um, as an investor, they're not getting the true information, but from what I gather, what this is saying is it could have an impact on investors if in fact it does come into effect, limiting their acquisition of future investment properties because of the whole loan to income ratio.
And like let's go through this really quick. So let's just say, you know what? I'm wrong. This rule is coming out quarter 1. And um, essentially, if the property you're buying and your personal income can't cover this loan to income requirement for your whole portfolio, let's just say that's all true. I don't think it is, but let's say it's true. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, if you dig into these loan to income requirements, roughly, and I pay for a few premium services where actual pundits in the industry, people that are involved in this stuff every single day, and it's their job to be um, write news articles that are behind $100 a month or whatever, industry specific stuff.
Mhm.
From there, I've seen that these rules apply once again. 15 to 20% of every lender's loans are allowed to exceed this loan to income requirement, and it resets every quarter. So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, um, you know, there's these rules. I might not meet them potentially. But okay, well, how do I mitigate it? Well, hey, every bank's allowed to ignore these rules for 15 to 20% of loans. Cool. So way one, have relationships with multiple lenders. Maybe it's a commercial, but that's what brokers do. Um, the second thing is we have to ask yourself. We know that, what is it, 3% of Canadians roughly own multiple properties. Okay, so we can't say 3% of mortgages are multiple properties because we know that there's a percentage of Canadians that don't own real estate at all. But let's just say that, I don't know, 40% of Canadians own homes that have mortgages, which I think is probably a larger number than that, but whatever. Uh, so that means roughly 7%, if we adjust, have multiple properties. Okay, well, how many multiple properties in any given quarter are these 7%? You know, if so, you got to ask yourself essentially what percentage of loans the banks are doing are multiple properties that are not going to meet these guidelines. If it's only works out to be 9% of their loans each quarter, well, shit, they're well below the threshold. So maybe these rules are giving lenders an excuse not to do business or an
Mhm.
excuse to charge a little more. But at the end of the day, these rule changes, even if they are the way they're being reported, which I'm skeptical on, they may not affect you anyways. So
Okay.
that's kind of how I approach this is like, in my opinion, it's probably not what's being reported. But even if it is, if you have a deeper understanding of how this works, it's probably not going to matter. And even if some lenders, let's just say one of the major banks does a ton of this stuff, they max out. Okay, well, either you can wait till the next quarter, which isn't forever, um, and then they reset. And hey, the beginning of every bank's quarter, there's going to be a gold rush of get in while it's hot. Towards the end, they max out, they get a little more restrictive. Like, once again, not the end of the world.
Right.
Plus, there's always banks that have slightly higher rates or their policies are a little more restrictive, or maybe they just have a little less risk appetite and maybe they don't max out. So there's going to be all different avenues, I think, for investors to work around and solve this if it even is a thing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, um, the other thing is in terms of options, this OSFI rule, supposed OSFI rule, only applies to the organized lenders, institutional lenders.
Federal
It does,
lenders.
yeah, it doesn't
It
affect
doesn't apply to
private lenders.
provincially regulated lenders,
Okay.
aka credit unions and like treasury banks.
Okay. Um, well, my final thought is, but I'm going to ask you one after. And my final thought is, if you have any questions, this is the reason why you work with a professional investment mortgage broker that will know how to help you navigate through these processes. But what is your final thought on this whole situation,
Well,
if it all comes
the
out?
first thing I'll say is if you're like, well, shit, Andrew, it sounds like the government's finally cracking down on lending. Oh no, this has been happening for a decade, guys, more than that, since 2009. This is nothing new. They're going to keep changing rules. Investors and the banks want to lend money. So everybody's going to keep adapting and figuring out ways to work around it. And it is what it is. And if you're really worried, like these rules don't affect commercial lending as an example. So, there's always going to be options. Like real estate investing is not going to disappear. It'll change. Believe it or not, back in, when Andrew was in his heyday, you could buy a rental property with 0% down. Like, and no, that wasn't the 60s. That was what, like 2005, 6, 7?
Yep.
Like, guys, things change. We have to put 20% down. There's rules where it can come from, the debt servicing rules, the stress test. Like, it's getting stricter. And even if you compare to like the early mid 2000s, um, you used to be able to buy a rental property basically by fogging a mirror. Show up and, I got a job, I'm good. Even in 2017, we had a lender that you put 35% down, and we showed a notice of assessment that showed you didn't owe taxes. You were approved. Done. Good. And this is a major bank. That's gone. So things are
Yeah.
changing, but there'll
Yeah.
continue to be loopholes and ways that it changes. And maybe at some point the government will shift and then they'll ease off on some of this stuff. I think the biggest issue is that, sorry, everyone, I'm sick and Andrew. He felt it was so important he dragged me out on this. I don't disagree. It's good to get the stuff out. But
Thanks. Thanks.
um, the other consideration is like OSFI, the regulator, they exist to lower risk. So at the end of the day, they're going to probably keep making changes to lower risk. So, you got one or two options. Decide Canada's hooped and go invest elsewhere, like maybe in Mexico or something. Or it is what it is, and it's going to keep changing. Maybe get in while it's hot, get in while you can. I'm not saying you should go one way or the other, but at the end of the day, um, you have to make a decision as an investor, the route you want to go. But hey, things are getting harder. Does that mean you have urgency? Does that mean that it is what it is, you'll deal with it as things change? Or does it mean you just go to other markets? At the end of the day, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but that's, I think, how you should approach these problems. But, every change is opportunity in some way.
Awesome, Keaton. Thank you again for sage advice, cool head. And it just keeps on reminding me, if you don't know, get and speak with somebody that does know. And so anybody is looking to invest or looks at mortgages and trying to get some ideas of what to do, please reach out to Keaton Kirkwood at Kirkwood Brennan Mortgage Group.
I appreciate
I'm
it.
sure that they will
I
be able
know,
to help you.
just like this video, like if we do chat, my goal is not going to be to convince you need to buy all the real estate right now. It's
Yeah,
rather like what's an objective look at what we know, what's an objective look at what maybe we can speculate, and then how can we reasonably move forward from that. It's not a sales pitch on why you need to buy real estate today.
I agree 100%, which is why you're my go-to guy. It's just that simple. You tell people what they need to hear, not necessarily what they want to hear. And you're not going to let them run down the hill with scissors in their hand, so to speak. You're going to guide them in a wise way. And that's why I always reach out to you, man. Thank
I
you. And I
appreciate it. I'll
really
always do my
appreciate
best.
coming on this call despite being less than healthy right now. So I
Little
appreciate it.
kids, I don't recommend them. They'll get you sick.
All right. Thank you so much, man.
Appreciate it. Chat soon.